Hello, welcome to Think Company. I am Abby DePrima, head of delivery here at Think. I want to welcome you to our inaugural Think Out Loud event. This event is what is going to be the first of hopefully many events where we're coming together to share ideas, get together, talk about a lot of the fun things that get us really excited about what we're working on within our industry. So one of the things that excites me the most about Think Company is just the really talented, smart people that work here, the years that they put into learning about their disciplines and their expertise. And tonight is an example of that. So you're going to hear about an area that is very relevant to a lot of our lives. And I'm going to turn it over to Hannah.
Hey, is my head framed if I stand like perfectly? So, hi, I am Hannah. I'm a content strategist and specialist here at Think. I've been here for about a year, and I primarily do UX writing, content design, this kind of thing. And so today I'm talking about a specific part of that area called conversation design. And what does that mean? It's not the thing where you like plan out an argument before you have it with someone. I know that's what it sounds like, but it's not. Conversation design is designing conversations, though, with technology, the way that you're interacting with what I will be calling bots. There are many different types of interactions that you talk or you type with AI technology, but I'm just going to say bot because it's easier. So there's that. Thank you. All right, so first is conversational interface. This is any sort of technology that you're having a conversation with. So this could be like a chat GPT, an Alexa. If you're talking to it and it's AI, it's a conversational interface. So we all use them in our daily lives in many different ways. A big one that's been coming up recently on our team is the pizza ordering app for Domino's. Really cool user experience if you need to order some pizza. Those are the two main ones, the voice AI, the one that you're physically talking to, and then the chatbot, the one that you're like writing to. So for kind of really cool areas that you can come from to work in conversation design, my favorite, because this is my background, is linguistics. So just the patterns of speech, like the math of language, if you will, that's a really cool place to come from when you're getting into conversation design. Another kind of two that go together pretty well is the psychology and the sociology. So we need to understand how people act, how they react to things, how they're feeling in a certain moment. Just kind of how the brain works is a really important thing to understand. And then a surprising one that I think is really cool is screenwriting. Because if you think about it, someone who's creating and writing scripts, they're thinking about a conversation from all these different angles and perspectives and thinking, how can this conversation add the most value to this interaction? So even though that might be a little unexpected, a screenwriting background can be really helpful for conversation design. So why do we need these conversational interfaces to begin with? Other than just everyone else is doing it, so we need to do it too, so we don't fall behind. What value are we actually bringing with these technologies? The first one that I like to add is the judgment-free. People often feel more comfortable talking with something that isn't going to come back and judge them for, asking a dumb question or asking a question about something sensitive and personal. They might be more comfortable. Another is infinite patience. Imagine, when you're talking on the phone with an agent, there are times where, they have to get through so many calls per day. So while they care about what you're saying, they might not have time to show that they care about what you're saying. So that's where some of these kind of conversational interfaces can come in, where you don't sense that they're rushed. You don't sense any sort of like, we need to hurry and get through this. Accessibility is a huge one that we keep in mind during the whole design process. These technologies are vital for people, for example, who are not able to see or not able to hear. These different types of interfaces can
Leo,
help them.
Air, what are you doing?
This is not part of the plan. It's definitely not Alexa or one of those going. But anyway, accessibility is great. They also cannot be multitasked. So think like you're in the kitchen and you're cooking and you're like, oh, I forgot. How much salt am I supposed to add? Hey, Alexa, blah, blah, blah. And then spear phishing. This is, the end of the days of Googling something, and then you're sifting through pages and pages looking for the answer you need. Now you can just ask, hey, how much salt do I need? And you immediately get the answer you're looking for. So hard stop, check. A different color slide, all the attention. Ethics and biases. I put this in a different color and right up front because this needs to be at the forefront of our minds every step of the way. How, as I'm writing this interaction, how could this possibly be taken out of context or used to harm people or to reinforce biases? As humans, we like to push the limits. We like to test our boundaries. But unfortunately, with technologies like this, that can create more problems than it solves. So, think about the input that we're giving it. It's learning from that. And we can accidentally create issues with the bot's personality suddenly becoming harmful to people. We also have to look at how the bots respond to unethical questions. For example, harassment. In the early days of Alexa and these kind of assistants, people would make inappropriate comments to the bot, and how the bot handles that situation is really important. So we're not reinforcing, it's okay to make jokes about things that it's not okay to make jokes about. So keeping things like that in mind during the whole process. So now a little more into the language itself. People sometimes think that a conversation is like a gumball machine. I put in a quarter, I get gum. I put in a quarter, I get gum. But it's not this simple. There are many, many different things happening all at the same time. When you're in person, think of like how much eye contact you're making. What are your hands doing? What are your eyebrows showing the person that how you feel about what they just said? There's interrupting. There are pauses. There's, oh, I forgot what I was going to say. All these different things happening in human-to-human conversation. And to make a bot feel real and accessible to us, these are things we have to keep in mind and consider. So the difference between language and speech, think of language as more like the math, like these are the rules that we're following, and speech is more the intent and the feeling behind what I'm saying. Both of those things are important to keep in mind for when we start to get to these different human things that we have to decide if we will or won't implement when we're designing our conversations. So, for example, turn taking. These are those little things that we do to tell the other person it's your turn to talk. So when you share your opinion like, oh, that dinner was really great, right? Right. There you go. It's your turn to talk. So things like this, right? Or you might say like, so these little things, the other person knows, okay, it's my turn. Overlapping and interruption. This is huge, especially for me. So I like to talk. So, how do we handle the situation? Being interrupted, someone barging in with their own opinion or feelings. Conversational repair. I like to think of the dog from Up, where he's like, I'm playing with my ball, I'm having the best day. Squirrel. I'm playing with my ball, I'm having the best day. How do you redirect the conversation back to what it was when people start to kind of veer off in another direction? Speech pattern mirroring. This is how I talk is how you're probably going to respond to me. So if I ask you a yes or no question, you're probably going to respond with yes or no. This kind of thing helps us with designing conversations. This one, I have a whole slide about it because it is super complicated. But how do we deal with the different cultures, different languages, different dialects, just different people and perspectives? How do we handle that huge complex issue when designing these bots? And the politeness and code switching, which kind of falls into that realm a little bit as well. But you'll speak differently to your friend than you will to a stranger you just met on the street. So, where in that zone do we want our bots to fit into? You may have heard of this before in English class. This guy, Paul Greiks, in the early 20th century, came up with this kind of rubric for how to create a successful conversation. So the first one is quality, and that is basically just what I'm saying to you is useful information. It's helpful, it matters. The quantity is you're not speaking too long or too short, you're providing enough information and enough detail to have a successful interaction. Relation is, I'm not going way over here and interrupting myself and changing my topic in the middle of a sentence. I'm keeping it related to the topic. And then manner, I'm going to be organized. This is more like how you're presenting the information. And according to Paul Greiks, you need all four of these things to have a successful interaction with someone, or in this case, bot. So the human path, and there's one kind of important thing I think is missing from this graphic, is like the feeling. But basically, on the human path, you had a speaker. I think a thing. I want you to know this thing, so I tell you this thing. You as the listener, you hear this thing. You maybe probably see some things like the body language, what is the face doing, and your brain processes that information. That's the very basic level. When we communicate with the machine, it's not that different, except that we kind of break down the processing part a little bit more so we can understand how it works. So I'm going through these 8 steps and talking to the machine, and then it goes through each of these steps to understand. This one scares a lot of people, and it's not really used. This is more hypothetical, so don't worry. You're not being watched through your cameras. But it hears you. It theoretically maybe sees you. It's processing, determining what you said, what it thinks you said. It's matching what you said to what it thinks you mean, and then it's creating a response. And the thing that's missing here is, like I said, the feeling. It doesn't know what I'm expressing if I'm feeling a certain thing at that moment. If I'm expressing anger, if I'm expressing frustration, it doesn't know that on its own. So the human part of this development is really important, especially for that. So now we're going to start to get into a little more of like the details of how we're actually going to build these bots. So when I say build, I don't mean like literally build, but teach them how to talk. Personality. This is kind of a hot button issue, is how much personality do we really want these things to have? And this is where this kind of sliding scale system comes in. So, do we want it to be like formal or casual? How much? It doesn't have to be one or the other. We can kind of decide like, somewhere in the middle feels good for our brand. You're also deciding, for example, these are just 4 that I picked off the top of my head, but like this one, expert versus novice, like, do we want it to feel like a teacher that knows all of this stuff, or do we want it to feel more like a friend who's kind of learning it with us? A little more relatable maybe to a lot of people. Do we want it to be excited versus calm? Are we using tons of exclamation points and like, yay, this is how much salt to use? Or is it calmer? Just like, yes, 2 tablespoons. That was a lot of salt. Don't use 2 tablespoons. 1 teaspoon. So we can do things like create personas like we do in UX design. But what a lot of research has actually found is that the persona isn't actually as important as the more linguistic side of things, which is the word choice and the word order and this kind of thing. So how is your bot going to behave? As we're deciding this, we're looking at the interaction goals, like what is the person trying to do? Why are they talking to the bot in the first place? The character traits, this is where we get more specific than just like, is it friendly? We're going to use more specific wording like nurture. So, nurture versus helpful, like, is this someone giving me directions, or is this my mom helping me figure out how to do something? That kind of more specific tone. And then the power dynamics sounds a little scary when you heard it that way, but it's just how much power are we giving this thing? And is it going to feel more personal? Is it going to use my name? Is it going to remember intimate details about my life? Maybe my credit card number, these kinds of things, things that we don't want normal people to know. How much access are we giving it? So these are kind of some more examples of just decisions we have to make ahead of time, right? So how is it going to behave? Prompting Typically with AI, when we say prompt, we mean like I write something to the chatbot so that I get something. In this case, we're reversing it. The chatbot is prompting us and how we should be talking. So it might ask us open-ended questions. It might give us a menu. I'm sure you can think of examples when you've spoken to a chatbot and you might start with an open-ended question like, how can I help you today? And then if you don't give it the answer at once, it might switch to a menu like, I can help you with these 3 things. Please pick one. To do this successfully, we have to create the order in a certain way. And the best way that we found is to first lead with the context, because you want the person to kind of remember why they're here, what they're doing, and then ends with the action that's being taken. People tend to remember the last thing they heard first. So provide the context, then give them what they need. And this is pretty successful. You also want to make sure that you're keeping a consistent structure. So you don't want to switch the verb tense in the middle of a sentence. You don't want to use different grammar types in one sentence. So a good example is, I can teach you how to fish, hunt, or golf. But you wouldn't say like, I can teach you all about fishing, and if you want to learn to hunt, I can do that. If you're switching up the pattern, it'll get confusing and overwhelming. And then just good UX principles in general. We want to be concise. We want to be very specific or precise. We don't want to use too much jargon that maybe people won't understand. So that kind of thing. And now, how it actually starts to look. We start to consider all these things. We're going to put it together to create 3 main important details. First, the bot knows what you teach it to know. So a lot of these natural language processing algorithms, they have a set of training data. And not us, we don't have to do this, don't worry. As an engineer will create a massive data set and teach it to the bot. And this is where it's getting its information. It's going to pull from this data. Conversation designers also do that, but for a very small, specific data set. So this is where you are creating, for example, the pizza ordering. You're going to create a set of data based on ordering pizza. So the bot will have this background knowledge to pull from, but it's also constrained to do that in the context of pizza. And we do that by teaching it utterances, intents, and slots. And I'll get into these more specifically. But in utterance is what I say. I'd like to order a sandwich. The intent is what I mean. I'd like to order a sandwich. In this case, it's the same. And then the slot is the detail. So the bot will hear, I'd like to order a sandwich. It knows this is what I want to do. And it knows it needs to ask for this next to complete the order. So we're filling in the gaps with that last part. So it might start to look like this as we're creating that data. We've got, the intent. We're going to name the intent. And some sample utterances. This is what we think people might say to get there. And the same with the slots. This is what we need. These are some kind of options. And this is what people might say or what we might be tasked in order to fill in those gaps. When it all comes together, it'll look something like this. We'll have intent, training utterances, and required slots. This is the data that we're teaching the bot, so it knows how to answer our questions or what to ask follow-up to pull more data. We also kind of use these pathways. This is a cool way to map it out and brainstorm. Typically, though, this isn't going to be the finished product because I'm sure you can imagine it gets out of hand really quickly. You might have 50 different utterances for one intent that your team came up with, and it would just explode and take up a whole wall. So this is more just kind of a brainstorming tool, but it can start to look something like this, where you kind of have a pattern that you're expecting the bot to go through. And this just helps you as you start to ideate more intents, more slots. What might we be looking for? Where it can get a little complicated. And when I say a little, I mean a lot. How much can the bot remember what you tell it to remember? So for example, I make this lamb biryani all the time, but the first time I probably asked it or needed a lot of information. The third time I made it, maybe it's able to remember, hey, they've done this before, so I'll just ask basic question. If I make this every other day, I probably know the recipe, but let's pretend I don't. it'll just go. It'll just go. So these are also things like if you tell it, hey, call me Hannah from now on instead of whatever, how long can it remember that information? And do we want it to remember that information? Localization is huge. There are so many huge differences between these different languages. I use Czech as an example because I can speak it, but also because every single word almost in the language has a different version if it's formal versus informal. So the bot might not necessarily understand that when I'm translating, hi, how are you? I mean this version or this version. And even culturally, it's very complicated about when to use each version. So this is something where you really need someone who understands to come in. If this is relevant for your business or your product, you need someone who knows the difference to come in and create that set of training data for, this is how to use this one. Now you might be thinking to yourself, okay, I need slash, I need a tense, I need utterances, I need a translator, I need all these things. That's a lot. How do I know what I actually need? Well, that's a good question. The answer is research. You will have transcripts. If your product is already out there in the world, you can have people come in and analyze transcripts and look at what is and what isn't working. You'll be doing some prototyping. We tend to follow the same kind of patterns like UX research. The main difference is that we're focusing on the language way more than like the design or what else is or is it working. We're really looking at language. So like the different research methods, one that focuses on that is conversation mining, which is where you go into, for example, subreddits and you look at how users are using language. What words are they using? What words are they using in a negative way? So let's avoid that kind of more language focused. But most of them look really similar, like competitive analysis, surveys, user logs. So not that different. Putting it all together, your workflow is going to look something like this. So the early stages, you're going to be designing, personality. What does our brand voice? How does that fit into the bot's voice? That kind of thing. You're going to start designing your prompts. These are not going to be perfect final editions. This is just getting your foot in the door, getting started. Same with like the intents. You're going to start creating spreadsheets with that training data that you're making. You'll start documenting like the pathways, where you think things are going to go and how they all fit together. And then finally, we're going to prototype and test. So again, looking a lot like UX research, the typical A/B testing, testing prototypes. My personal favorite is the Wizard of Oz. And this is where one person pretends to be the bot and they actually have interactions with people to see what does and doesn't work. If I say this, will it work better? It's kind of a fun one to do with coworkers. I don't know that you can legally go out and do that to people in the wild, but it's a fun thing to do with each other. And finally, launch and post-launch. This is more just about like how we maintain that documentation, because you have all these different flows and tables and documents all over the place, making sure that they stay consistent with the brand voice, making sure that they're accessible, that we're keeping a correct log of our bugs and how we're communicating these things with each other. And then the post-launch, similar kind of just making sure we're keeping full transcripts of every conversation so that we can constantly go back and redo these conversations. How can we make them better based on what the users are actually saying and doing? Really important to kind of keep those logs and always making it better, always fixing patches, always making it better and better. Yeah, that is conversations. So
So now we have time for Q&A. And if anyone also is on the Zoom, I can check the chat if there's anything in here. But anyone in person have any questions for Hannah?
Yep.
On the one slide, you mentioned just a handful of like traits. I think it's like warm and cold, formal, informal. Is there any sort of consensus around a list like that? Yeah.
I don't know for sure if there isn't one, for example, like Apple's design system. People go back there and they're like, oh, what's Apple doing? That works. I don't know that there's anything like that, but I think that it would be fairly easy to pull from your brand voice itself. So if you already have an established voice for your brand, we're like, I'm a nurturer, I'm helpful and knowledgeable, like these sort of things that you already have laid out, you can easily pull those and decide how far do I want to go on the scale. So I think that can be more helpful. But, I think there's basic ones like, am I going to be friendly? Am I going to be rude? Like that kind of thing. Because some companies will actually fall further on the scale than you expect. Like MailChimp has a really fun kind of blunt brand voice. So they might kind of fall a little on the rude side. And it's fun. We like that about it. So, yeah.
Hannah, you mentioned sort of ethics and training these bots to respond appropriately. I'm just curious, is there any consensus or any sort of like baseline that you've been able to find of what's acceptable or what is good or bad or right or wrong in that arena?
I mean, there are a lot of examples of bad ways to handle it out there. And there are examples of good ways to handle it. I think that especially for something that's like language based, there's so much subjectivity. It depends so much on the context and what's being said and why it's being said. So it's hard to create one rubric that fits all of these different circumstances. But I think that when it comes to the more sensitive topics, what's been working better is a pretty quick shutdown, but in a polite way. So, for example, you might just say something like, I don't like to talk about that. What I can do is help you order a pizza, or, and that's kind of where you like redirect it back to what you want the person to be talking about. And that's a pretty clear, like, no, we're not going to go there. We're not going to do that. So that seems to be the most general thing, I would say. Yeah. Tony.
Okay. So segueing from that, as language continues to evolve, sometimes maybe language that wasn't problematic at all once upon a time now takes on different shades of meaning. And I can think of words, I won't say them, but maybe 50 years ago or whatever, it was just the common terminology. Now you're like, ugh, how do we, continuously train our bots to keep up on that?
Yeah, well, so hopefully you have a lot of user logs. So for one thing, if people are actually using this kind of language or not, for one thing. And that's a good starting place. Like, is this actually a problem for our particular product? But then it is just the trading data. Like if you're starting to see like, this kind of word is being used regularly, let's just go in and tell the bot to react in this way when this word comes up. This is how we're going to react. So it's just, like you said, actually constantly training it, do better, be better. Yeah.
So you mentioned the difference between like the training set from like an engineering point of view and then one from a conversation design point of view. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Like, so does the subset draw from both sets? Just talk a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah. So if you think about it, like you as a person, you go to elementary school, high school, you learn all of this information that pretty much everybody knows. But then if you go to university, you learn a really specific topic that you can talk about really, really well. And so that's kind of the difference between the two sets of training data. Is the first one is like, that's going to be pulled from the internet. Like that's just the knowledge that every chatbot in the world is going to know, probably the same set of data. And we're coming in with our intents and our utterances, and we're creating that specific knowledge that we want it to have. So it's going to know everything, but it's really good at talking about these things that we teach it. Yeah.
I'm curious to see your thoughts as a conversation designer about co-designing with LLMs. So if you think about old school IVRs where everything's programmed, now you have these adaptive systems that can do some of that for you. So I'm curious odds about what human has to do versus what you can use the
So the training data that we're coming up with in a case like that, it's going to be less like specific words, specific sentences, and more we're teaching it how to talk. So we're probably still going to give it like the specific knowledge it needs to know for whatever industry is involved in, but the training data won't be like, okay, say, I would like a large sandwich. It's going to be something more like user describes the sandwich. And it's just a more open-ended set of data rather than like very specific words.
Okay. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about going through the conversation logs, whether that's automated, whether that's something people are doing individually, what you're looking for, and like what that was?
That's a good question. I mean, there's definitely technology out there that can do that, especially like if you're looking for target words like keywords and things, you can definitely, feed that into an AI and say like, hey, anytime this word comes up, pull that log or highlight this. So, that's definitely a way to make it faster. I think it also depends on like the scale that we're talking about, because if it's thousands of logs from a huge company, that's going to be a lot to go through. But if it's smaller, it's easier for a person to go through, and maybe they can be the challenge with using the AI versus the person is the person can see the whole context and understand the feelings behind it of like, this person was clearly angry when they were doing this. Whereas like the AI is just pulling because the keyword is there. But what if that keyword is missing, but that intent is there? They just use different wording. You need someone to go in and be able to sort through those and find the difference. Minutes? Yeah.
I have a question. I'm just thinking about how a lot of users are already on like ChatGPT or Perplexity. Do you think that we're like eventually trending toward like a best practice or most familiar type of conversation that users are familiar with versus a specific like Domino's example?
I'm not sure the answer to that one, to be honest. Like, I think that this technology for sure is going to work its way into pretty much everything. It already has, really. And there's a lot more effort that goes into designing one of those open-ended like chat GPT type of AIs rather than something that is more constrained. So like budget is a big concern for stuff like that. How much time do we have? I feel like the trend probably will eventually go more open, but how realistic that is for everyone, I don't know. I can't say.
I got what so from like a sentiment analysis perspective, are these bots able to detect like maybe changes in volume or detect that hey, this customer interrupted me mid response, so I should switch my tone, or I'm sensing that this person's angry or frustrated?
That's a really hard thing for it to do. The interruption thing, yes, you can absolutely teach it what to do when it's interrupted. You can teach it what to do when it's interrupted with specific words. Like if people start cursing at the bot, it's going to be like, okay, I'm going to redirect you to a person. Like I clearly can't do this. So here you go. But as far as like, it can't sense the emotion and the feeling, and it's pulling from words and from data, and you just can't create data from feelings. So that's where you need people like us. Yeah. Amy, did you have a
Yeah, so you were mentioning the sliders earlier with, the different tones and approaches that these bots can take. Is it possible for them to dynamically change the sliders as the conversation is going through? Like maybe it sees this person is not reacting well to me talking to them like I'm an expert. Maybe I need to go down on the slider. Is that a thing?
I feel like you could kind of teach, because you can teach them to use different tones in different situations. So I feel like you could create a set of triggers for something like that, where, if the response is coming back of like, I still don't understand, okay, maybe that's a good time to switch gears, and maybe I can word it slightly differently. That would be a case like you mentioned where like it might start with an open-ended question like, hey, how can I help you today? And if it's not understanding and they're not having a successful interaction, it might switch to a menu option and say like, okay, I can help you with this, this, and this. Pick one.
I have a question. As brands are starting to converge like search experiences with other things like customer service, do you have any perspective on whether it's best practice to have like a single agent, or as like you move to a different topic, like a customer service topic, to like actually change to a different agent and chatbot experience so that the customer knows you've switched contacts?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know. Like I don't know if it would be necessarily, I feel like it might be jarring for the user to switch to a completely new product, because even though we understand we're talking to a bot, in our heads, we're talking to a new person. Like, so it might kind of make the user feel like, oh, I have to reintroduce my topic. I have to say what I said again. I need to re-explain everything. And then it might also make them feel like, okay, now I have to change the way that I'm talking as well, because it's that language pattern mirroring is where however I talk is how you're probably going to talk. So if you're switching gears too often, I feel like that might be kind of jarring. But it's a really interesting thing to think about. Like, this not working over here. Let's try Mary and see if she can help out.
Question, like as you're talking, they always talk about like human in the loop and all this stuff. But like you also mentioned something about like the frustration could increase on the customer side that the bot can't handle. So that's like shunted over to human. So is it like ethical to like basically give all the hard stuff to the people? Or is this something that's a design consideration ongoing as we see?
I mean, I think all of this stuff is ongoing. Like, things change, people change, technology changes. So we should never stop and decide like, this is good enough, we're good. But I think it really depends on you and your business, right? Like, you have a goal. When someone comes to your website, or calls you on the phone, there's a goal that they're trying to accomplish. So it's really you deciding at what point is it time to shift gears and put it on a person so that they can accomplish their goals. If this is clearly not working, and what you really don't want, especially, is for a frustrated person to get to the people. Like, you want to kind of avoid that. So I think the earlier you can catch those feelings, the better. And that just goes back again to like the data that you're teaching it. When you start to hear these words, it's time to, move on to someone who can help more, who can understand those feelings and respond to the feelings that the person is giving. Was there anything from Zoom? Nope. No. Cool. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming to my session.
Thank you. Again, this was our first one, but we should have plenty more. As you can see, we have lots of talented people here, and this event is really meant to unlock all of the great knowledge and expertise that we have in here. So we hope to see you again at the next one, and enjoy food and drinks.